Trust me, the information is in the safe. All right, I'll take care of this.
Okay, make sure you do. We're here to work.
I can't trust you.
Partial to post-war British painters.
I can't imagine. Did she tell you? You've known all along. He's threatening him in a dream.
The dream's collapsing. Try to keep Sato under a little bit longer.
Got one.
Oh, that's not true.
Doesn't matter. You failed.
Why now?
I'm still dreaming.
How'd it go?
Not good.
You played by my rules.
Ah, yes, please.
You. What the hell was all that?
Is that you? Come on. Sorry about your leg. Again. It's time we disappear.
Nothing. But I can't.
But it's not your idea because you know I...
The waves crash against the shore, slow and heavy, like the ocean is breathing. A man lies on the sand, coughing up salt water, fingers digging into wet grit as if the ground might disappear. His name is Cobb, but he doesn't remember how he got here. He only knows one thing. This place feels wrong. Too calm, too staged. A shadow falls over him. An old man's voice cuts through the surf, calm and dangerous. "You're waiting for a train," the voice says. Cobb looks up, confused. A train? The ground trembles. Somewhere deep inside him, fear wakes up. Moments earlier, or maybe hours, or maybe years, Cobb was somewhere else entirely. A city folded in on itself, streets bending upward like mirrors breaking the sky. He was inside a dream, stealing secrets from a man named Saito. Not with weapons, with ideas. Cobb does this for a living. He breaks into minds while people sleep, slipping past their defenses, digging through memories they don't even know they're guarding. It's illegal, dangerous, and for Cobb, it's the only thing he has left. But the job goes wrong. It always does. Saito realizes the truth just before the dream collapses. Gunfire, shattering glass. The world implodes. Cobb wakes up on a train, heart racing, sweat cold on his skin. The dream is over, but the failure is real. Saito isn't angry, he's impressed. And that's worse, because men like Saito don't let things go. They make offers. Cobb returns to his reality, a place that feels thinner every day. He can't go home. Not to his children. Not to the life he lost. The United States wants him for a crime he swears he didn't commit. Every night, when he closes his eyes, she appears. Mal, his wife, dead, and somehow not gone. She walks through his dreams like a ghost who knows where all the knives are hidden. Her voice is soft, familiar, lethal. "You know this isn't real," she whispers. And Cobb wakes up shaking, guilt sitting on his chest like a weight he can't push off. Saito's offer comes fast. One impossible job in exchange for everything Cobb wants most, his freedom. his children. A chance to go home. But this isn't extraction, it's inception. Planting an idea so deep inside a man's mind that he believes it was his own. Cobb laughs when he hears it. Then he stops, because Saito isn't joking. And because Cobb has done impossible things before. To pull it off, he needs a team. Arthur, precise and sharp, who plans dreams like chess games. Ariadne, a student with a mind so powerful she can build worlds without realizing it. Eames, a forger who can become anyone inside a dream. Yusuf, who creates sedatives strong enough to hold the mind under while reality keeps moving. Each of them brings a piece of the puzzle. Cobb brings the danger. He doesn't tell them everything. He never does. As Ariadne learns to build dreamscapes, she notices the cracks. The rules bend around Cobb. His subconscious fights back harder than anyone else's. Elevators filled with memories. Doors he refuses to open. And always Mal, stepping out of nowhere, smiling like she knows the ending. Ariadne sees it before the others do. Cobb isn't just afraid of failure, he's afraid of what's buried inside him, of a truth he's been running from, even in his sleep. The plan is set. Layers of dreams stacked inside each other, time stretching thinner with every descent. If they fail, there's no waking up clean, just endless falling. And as the plane lifts into the sky, carrying them toward the job that will either save Cobb or destroy what's left of him, he closes his eyes and thinks of his children's faces. He tells himself, this is the last time. But somewhere, deep in the dark, a train is already speeding closer. The plane hums softly as it cuts through the clouds, a sound so steady it almost feels like a lullaby. Passengers sleep, heads tilt, mouths fall open, and beneath that calm, Cobb's team prepares to disappear. Yusuf checks the sedative one last time. Thick, milky, strong enough to drag them down several layers and keep them there. Cobb watches the liquid swirl and feels a familiar tightening in his chest. This isn't just sleep. This is surrender. The moment the drug hits, the world tilts. Gravity loosens its grip. Cobb blinks and the plane is gone. He's standing on rain-soaked pavement under harsh neon lights. A city at night. Yusuf's dream. Cars hiss past. Music thumps somewhere far away. It feels solid. Too solid. Too solid. Cobb knows better. This is the first layer, the shallow end, and already his instincts are screaming. They move fast. Saito is with them, playing the role of target-turned-ollie, though no one truly trusts him. Arthur lays out the rules again. Time slows the deeper they go. 5 minutes here becomes an hour below. A kick is their only way out. Miss it, and they're trapped. Cobb nods, but his eyes keep drifting. Watching crowds, watching reflections, waiting for her. The attack comes without warning. Gunfire rips through the street, screams, chaos. Cobb dives, dragging Saito with him as bullets chew up concrete. This wasn't supposed to happen. Projections aren't meant to be this aggressive. Someone has trained this mind to defend itself. Fisher's subconscious is militarized. That changes everything. Arthur's voice is sharp in Cobb's ear. We're compromised. And beneath that urgency is something worse. Accusation. This was Cobb's plan. They escape, barely, retreating deeper into the dream. A warehouse. Flickering lights. Blood on Saito's shirt. Real blood. In the dream, pain doesn't usually linger like this. But under heavy sedation, the rules are breaking. If Saito dies here, he won't wake up. He'll fall into limbo. Cobb knows what that means. He's been there before. A place without time, without structure. A place built from regret. There's no choice now. They have to go deeper. Arthur argues, logic clashing with desperation. Ariadne watches Cobb's face as he makes the call. She sees it, the way his jaw tightens, the way his eyes harden. He's not just chasing the job anymore, he's running from something. Again, they descend into the second layer. A hotel corridor stretches out, elegant and quiet. Time slows further. Arthur takes point, guiding Fisher into a fabricated confrontation with his own subconscious projections. The plan is delicate. Convince Fisher his mind is under attack, then guide him toward the idea they want to plant. Ariadne helps shape the environment, walls shifting subtly, reality bending at the edges. She feels powerful and terrified. Then the floor lurches. Gravity slips sideways. Glass shatters. Bodies float. Arthur slams into a wall, weightless, fighting physics itself as the dream destabilizes. Somewhere above, chaos in the first layer is bleeding downward. Timing is unraveling. Control is slipping. And through it all, Cobb feels her before he sees her. Mal steps out of an elevator that shouldn't exist. Barefoot. Calm. Her eyes lock onto him, full of accusation and longing twisted together. "You're trying to leave me again," she says softly. The sound of her voice cuts deeper than any bullet. Ariadne watches in horror as Mal pulls a gun and shoots Fisher without hesitation. The target drops, dying. The mission teeters on the edge of collapse. Ariadne confronts Cobb, shouts over the ringing silence. "She's real to you," she says. "You brought her with you." Cobb doesn't deny it. There's no time for lies anymore. Fisher is dying. Saito is bleeding out. And Mal smiles, knowing she's winning. "We're still together," she whispers to Cobb. "Down there." To save the mission, Cobb makes the choice he's been avoiding. They go deeper still, into the third layer. Snow. Cold. A fortress rising out of white nothingness. Time stretched so thin it almost snaps. As they plunge, Cobb knows the truth. This job isn't about Fisher anymore. It's about facing the guilt he buried so deep it learned how to wear a face. And if he fails here, he won't just lose the mission, he'll lose himself. Cold slams into them like a wall. Snow howls sideways, biting exposed skin, turning breath into fog that vanishes instantly. The third layer is brutal by design. A fortress squats ahead, all concrete and steel, half buried in white. Cobb steadies himself, boots crunching as if this place has always existed. It hasn't, but it feels old. Permanent. And that makes it dangerous. Fisher is alive again here, dragged back from the edge of death, confused and raw. That's the point. Vulnerability cracks the mind open. Eames takes the lead now, reshaping himself into figures from Fisher's past, nudging emotions, steering suspicion. The idea they're planting needs grief to take root. Loss. A father's shadow stretching too long. Cobb watches it unfold with a hollow ache. He knows exactly how powerful that shadow can be. Gunfire erupts from the fortress walls. Projections swarm like ants protecting a nest. Bullets tear through snowbanks. The team moves, fast and coordinated, but the resistance is relentless. This mind doesn't want to be changed. It's fighting for its shape. Cobb pushes forward anyway, heart pounding, each step echoing with a memory he refuses to name. Inside, concrete corridors hum with tension. Explosions thunder. Eames jokes to keep fear at bay, but his eyes are sharp, calculating odds. Ariadne sticks close to Cobb now. She stopped pretending this is just architecture. She sees how the dream reacts to him, how reality bends when he hesitates. "What happens if we don't come back?" she asks quietly, almost lost in the noise. Cobb doesn't answer right away. Then, softly, "We get lost." He doesn't say where. Arthur's voice crackles in their ears from the second layer. He's running out of time. Gravity still isn't right. The kick window is narrowing. Everything is stacking wrong. Cobb makes another call. Risky, necessary. Fisher must reach the inner vault, the place where his subconscious hides the truth about his father. If they can open it, the idea will stick. If not, this all collapses. They reach the vault chamber. Silence falls heavy, broken only by Fisher's breathing. He steps forward, hands shaking, confronting a memory he's avoided his whole life. The door opens. Inside, not secrets of power, but a simple truth. His father wanted him to be his own man. The idea slides into place, subtle and irreversible. Inception achieved, but victory is thin, fragile. Because Cobb feels it, the pull downward. Saito is still dying. Mal is still waiting. And time is almost gone. Ariadne realizes what Cobb intends before he says it. "You're going after her," she says, not accusing, afraid. Cobb nods. He can't leave Saito, and he can't keep running from Mal. The others prepare for the kick. Explosions timed, bodies positioned. The snow fortress begins to collapse in slow motion. Ariadne grabs Cobb's arm. "You don't have to do this alone." They fall. Limbo opens like a memory with no edges. An endless city built from fragments of Cobb's life. Streets he's walked, rooms he's loved in, decades of dream time crystallized into concrete and glass. And there she is, Mal, waiting in a sunlit apartment that never existed and always did. Her smile is gentle, devastating. "You came back to me," she says. Cobb steps inside, heart breaking all over again. This place is his sin. He built it with her, once, when they were gods of their own reality. He remembers now how he planted the idea in her mind that their world wasn't real, how it never left, how she carried it back with her, how it killed her. The guilt crashes over him, relentless. "I can't stay," Cobb says, voice shaking. Mal's expression hardens, pain curdling into fury. "You're choosing them over us," she says. The world trembles. Ariadne pulls Cobb back from the edge as buildings crumble. Saito lies nearby, old and broken, lost in years of limbo. Cobb kneels beside him, whispering a promise. "We're going home." He doesn't know if it's true. He just knows he has to try. The water rises, the city dissolves, and as Cobb lets go, trusting the fall, one question burns brighter than all the rest. When he wakes up, will it finally be real? Silence comes first, not peace, absence. Cobb opens his eyes to an empty shoreline, gray water stretching forever beneath a blank sky. Limbo without Mal is wrong in a way that twists his stomach. For the first time, the place he built feels abandoned. He walks through collapsing memories, buildings eroding into mist, every step lighter than it should be. Time has no teeth here. It just watches. He finds Saito at the edge of the water, ancient and worn, eyes dulled by decades that never truly passed. A man who's lived an entire lifetime trapped inside someone else's regret. Cobb sits beside him, the weight of everything finally pressing down. "We're not meant to be here," Cobb says. His voice echoes too long. Saito studies him, then nods, like he's remembering something important he almost forgot. The sound of a gunshot snaps the world apart. Cobb jerks awake. Air. Weight. Gravity slams back into place. He's on the plane, lungs burning, heart racing like it's been running for years. Around him, passengers stir, seatbelts click, overhead lights hum. Reality feels fragile, like glass that might crack if he breathes too hard. Cobb turns slowly. Saito sits nearby, younger again, eyes sharp. He looks at Cobb. Recognition flashes. A promise remembered. The plane lands. Cobb doesn't move right away. He waits for Mal, for the familiar pull of panic, for the dream to betray him. It doesn't. Ariadne watches him from a few rows up, searching his face. Cobb gives the smallest nod. Something has changed. Not healed, but lighter. Customs is the final test. Every step toward the counter feels like walking across thin ice. Cobb hands over his passport, bracing for the sound of his name being flagged, for hands on his shoulders, for everything to collapse at the last second. The officer types. Pauses. Stamps. Slides the passport back. "Welcome home." The words hit harder than any gunshot. Cobb swallows, vision blurring as he walks through the terminal, past glass and light and noise that feels unreal in its simplicity. Outside, the world waits exactly as it should. He gets into the car. The engine starts. Tires roll. No jump cuts, no distortions, just time moving forward. Then, he's there. The house hasn't changed. Sunlight spills across the yard. And there they are, his children, older now, running, laughing. Real in a way dreams never quite get right. Cobb stops at the edge of the patio, afraid to move, afraid that stepping closer might wake him up. He spins the top from his pocket, sets it on the table out of habit. It wobbles, spins. Cobb doesn't watch it. He walks toward his children instead, dropping to his knees as they crash into him, arms tight around his neck, laughter warm against his skin. He closes his eyes and holds them like he's afraid the universe might change its mind. For the first time and longer than he can remember, his chest doesn't ache with loss. Just presence. Just now. Behind him, unnoticed, the top keeps spinning. Slower. Slower. It wobbles, just slightly, catching the light at the edge of the table. And then, cut to black. Time doesn't rush back all at once. It seeps in. Quiet moments stretch, unbroken by gunfire or collapsing worlds. Cobb wakes up the next morning, half expecting the ceiling to ripple, half expecting Mal's voice to slip through the cracks of his thoughts. It doesn't. Sunlight stays where it should. The air smells like coffee and clean sheets. Ordinary things. And somehow, that feels heavier than any dream. But the calm doesn't last. It never does. The consequences of what they did begin to surface, subtle at first. News articles. Corporate shifts. Fisher dismantles his father's empire exactly as planned. The idea has taken root, growing like it was always meant to be there. Cobb watches it from a distance, a strange mix of relief and unease tightening his chest. They changed a man's life without his consent. He tells himself it was necessary. He tells himself it's over. Except Ariadne doesn't look convinced. She meets Cobb in a quiet cafe days later, her eyes sharper now, older somehow. "You let go of her," she says. Not a question. Cobb nods. "I had to." Ariadne stirs her coffee, watching the surface swirl. "That doesn't mean she's gone forever." The words linger. Cobb feels them lodge somewhere deep. He doesn't argue. He can't, because the dreams still come, not the violent ones, not the ones where Mal storms in like a weapon. These are quieter, empty hallways, rooms filled with light but no sound. Places Mal used to be. Cobb wakes from them with his heart racing anyway, unsure if peace is just another layer he hasn't learned to question yet. Arthur calls next. He sounds tired, relieved, changed. The The job made waves. People are talking. Governments, corporations. The technology is spreading faster than anyone expected. Cobb listens, dread creeping in. This power was never meant to be common. He knows what it does to people. He knows what it did to him. Elsewhere, Saito sits alone in a room overlooking the city, hands folded, eyes distant. He remembers everything now. Limbo. Decades lived in a world that wasn't real, the promise Cobb made. Saito keeps his word, but the cost echoes in his silence. Some deals follow you even after they're paid. Cobb tries to be present for his children. He really does. Homework at the table, laughter at dinner. But part of him stays alert, always scanning for cracks in reality. He keeps the top in his pocket, feeling its weight like a loaded question. He doesn't spin it as often anymore, but he hasn't thrown it away either. One night, Ariadne calls him. Her voice is tight. Someone's experimenting, she says, pushing past the safety margins. Multiple dreamers, shared spaces. Cobb closes his eyes. He sees collapsing cities, drowning memories. That never ends well, he says. I know. The truth settles in slowly, unwelcome but undeniable. Inception wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a proof of concept. And now others want more. Deeper layers, longer stays. No rules. Cobb feels the old pull returning, not toward the dreams themselves, but toward responsibility. Toward the knowledge that if this goes wrong, people like him are the only ones who understand how bad it can get. He stands in his children's doorway that night, watching them sleep, the sound of their breathing anchoring him to the moment. Fear coils tight in his chest. Fear of leaving again. Fear of staying. Fear that the line between dream and reality will always be thinner for him than anyone else. Cobb steps outside into the quiet dark, pulling the top from his pocket. He turns it over in his hand, worn edges catching the light. For a long moment, he considers spinning it, just to be sure. He doesn't. Instead, he pockets it and looks up at the night sky, knowing one thing with terrifying clarity. The world learned how to invade dreams. And sooner or later, someone is going to push too far. When that happens, Cobb will have to choose whether to look away or dive back in. The call comes before dawn. No warning, no build-up. Just Ariadne's name lighting up Cobb's phone like a flare in the dark. He answers without speaking. He already knows this won't be about theory. Her breathing is shallow, controlled, the way it gets when something has gone very wrong. They lost someone, she says. 3 layers down. No kick, no exit. Cobb sits on the edge of the bed, the weight of the words pressing into him. Lost doesn't mean dead. It's worse than that. It means drifting, identity thinning, time stretching until the mind forgets what it was supposed to return to. Who? He asks. Does it matter? Ariadne replies. Silence. Then, quieter. They're still alive. By nightfall, Cobb is standing in a warehouse that smells like oil and cold concrete. New equipment. Cleaner. Faster. Dangerous in ways the original team never allowed. The operators talk in confident voices, throwing around minutes and layers like numbers can protect them from consequences. Cobb sees the flaw instantly. He always does. They're chasing depth, not control. The sedative hits harder than he expects. The fall is violent. One moment the world exists, then it fractures. He wakes into a city caught mid-collapse. Buildings frozen halfway through, folding in on themselves. Cars suspended in the air like discarded toys. This dream is unstable, patched together by someone who stayed too long and forgot how structure works. Cobb moves carefully, feeling the environment react to his presence. It knows him, or maybe it remembers him. Deeper down, the rules dissolve further. Gravity pulses. Time hiccups. Cobb finds traces of the lost dreamer everywhere. Footprints that loop back on themselves. Doors leading to the same room, no matter which way they open. Panic stains the architecture. This mind is breaking. Cobb drops another layer. Here, the world is quiet. A shoreline without waves, a horizon that never changes, and standing there, staring at the water, is the lost dreamer. Young, hollow-eyed, barely holding shape. I can't tell if I'm awake, they whisper when Cobb approaches. Their voice echoes wrong, like it's not sure where it belongs. Cobb kneels in front of them. He doesn't rush. That's the mistake everyone makes. You're here, he says. That means you're not gone. The dreamer laughs, brittle and sharp. You don't know that. Cobb does, though. He's lived here, built here, destroyed himself here. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the top, sets it spinning on the sand. It whirs softly, steady and true. This is how I remember, he says, not by checking if it falls, but by choosing to believe what I feel. The dream trembles. The top wobbles. Above them, Ariadne fights the clock. Kicks line up, windows close. The margin for error evaporates. Cobb takes the dreamer's hands. When the pull comes, he says, "Don't fight it. Let it take you up." The dreamer's grip tightens, fear flashing across their face. "What about you?" Cobb hesitates. For a fraction of a second, the old temptation whispers, "Stay, fix it, build something perfect." But he thinks of his children's breathing in the dark, of mornings that don't glitch, of a life that exists only if he keeps choosing it. "I'm done living down here," he says. The kick hits like a thunderclap. Water rushes up. The world implodes. Cobb lets go. He wakes choking, gasping, dragged back into his body with a violence that steals his breath. Around him, operators shout. The dreamer screams, then goes still. Alive. Breathing. Saved. Cobb stares at the ceiling, chest heaving. For the first time, limbo doesn't reach for him when he closes his eyes. It recedes, not gone, but quiet. Ariadne leans over him, relief softening her face. "You came back," she says. Cobb nods slowly. He feels exhausted. "Empty, clean. I always planned to," he replies. And this time, he knows it's true. The dreams don't stop completely. Cobb never expected them to. They soften instead, losing their sharp edges, fading like scars that no longer ache unless pressed. Weeks pass, then months. The world keeps moving forward, indifferent to the battles fought beneath its surface. That, more than anything, convinces him it's real. Cobb steps away from the work. Not dramatically, no speeches. He just stops answering certain calls. Lets others take the lead. Ariadne understands without needing explanation. She's already building something different. Safer frameworks, limits, rules that respect how fragile the mind really is. Arthur sends the occasional update. Eames disappears into a dozen new identities. Life fractures into normality. And Cobb stays. He learns the rhythm of ordinary days again. Morning light through the kitchen window. The sound of cereal bowls clinking. Arguments over homework. Laughter that doesn't echo. At night, he sits with his children as they fall asleep, listening to their breathing slow, anchoring himself to the steady proof that this moment exists whether he watches it or not. The top lives in a drawer now, not hidden, not honored, just there. Sometimes Cobb catches himself reaching for it out of habit. Each time, he stops, not because he's afraid of the answer, but because he no longer needs the question. Saito's world changes quietly. Corporations adapt. Governments hesitate. The technology remains, but it grows teeth. Oversight. Fear. Stories circulate about people who stayed too long, who came back wrong. Cobb hears them and feels a familiar chill. He knows the cost better than anyone. He also knows that some doors, once opened, never fully close. One evening, as the sun sinks low and the sky burns orange, Ariadne visits. They sit on the porch, watching shadows stretch across the yard. "Do you ever miss it?" she asks. "Not the danger. The other thing. The godlike certainty of building worlds from nothing." Cobb thinks for a long moment. "I miss who I thought I was," he says finally, "before I knew what it cost." Ariadne nods. She understands. She always did. Later, alone, Cobb walks through the house, fingertips brushing walls, door frames, objects grounded in weight and consequence. This place doesn't bend for him. It doesn't forgive mistakes. And that's why it matters. Upstairs, he pauses outside the bedroom where his children sleep, the sound of their quiet breathing pulling him fully into the present. For the first time, the fear of waking up somewhere else is gone. Somewhere far away, someone spins atop of their own, desperate for certainty, for proof that their world won't betray them. Cobb knows that feeling intimately. He wishes he could tell them the truth, that reality isn't something you confirm with a test. It's something you commit to. Again, and again, and again. He steps outside, the night air cool against his skin, and looks up at the stars. They don't shimmer or glitch. They just exist, steady, indifferent, beautiful in their refusal to explain themselves. Cobb breathes in, breathes out. The dreams fade into the background of who he is. Not gone, but no longer in control. He doesn't need perfect certainty. He doesn't need to know how deep reality goes. He has something better now, something heavier, something real. Inside, a drawer remains closed, and for the rest of his life, that's enough. Christopher Nolan didn't stumble into Inception. He circled it for nearly a decade, carrying the idea like a half-remembered dream that refused to settle. Long before spinning hallways and folding cities became pop culture shorthand, Nolan was obsessed with a simpler, stranger question. What if the mind could be the ultimate crime scene? Not the future, not outer space, just the fragile architecture of human thought. That fixation, quietly developing alongside his rise from Memento to The Dark Knight, would eventually crystallize into one of the most ambitious original blockbusters Hollywood has ever financed. By 2010, Nolan had earned a rare position in the industry. He was a director studios trusted with scale, money, and creative freedom, a combination almost extinct. Batman Begins proved he could reboot myth, The Dark Knight proved he could balance spectacle with moral complexity, and suddenly, Warner Brothers was willing to bankroll something audacious, an original, high-concept science fiction film without a built-in franchise safety net. That matters. In an era already leaning towards sequels and intellectual property mining, Inception existed because Nolan had leverage, and he used every inch of it. At the core of his vision was control. Nolan has always been fascinated by systems, memory in Memento, obsession in The Prestige, chaos versus order in The Dark Knight. Inception feels like the culmination of those obsessions, stacking them vertically until the structure itself becomes the story. Dreams within dreams, rules layered on rules, time stretched, compressed, weaponized. But this isn't complexity for complexity's sake. Nolan's guiding principle was clarity through rigor. If the rules are precise enough, he believed, audiences would follow him anywhere, even into a narrative that folds in on itself like an Escher staircase. What sets Nolan apart is his resistance to abstraction. Despite the film's cerebral reputation, his vision was grounded in physicality. Dreams and Inception don't shimmer or dissolve into surreal mush. They have weight. Gravity matters. Architecture obeys logic until it doesn't, and when it breaks violently. Nolan wanted dreams to feel inhabitable, not symbolic. That's why the film leans so heavily on practical effects, real locations, and tangible environments. Even when reality bends, the texture remains stubbornly real. You don't float through ideas here, you run through them. This approach also reflects Nolan's personal distrust of digital excess. He has always favored in-camera solutions, and Inception became a manifesto for that philosophy. The rotating hallway fight wasn't conceived as a visual effects problem, but as a mechanical one. How do you make gravity disappear without cheating? Nolan's answer was to build the impossible and then throw actors inside it. The result isn't just impressive, it's convincing in a way CGI rarely achieves. You feel the strain in Joseph Gordon-Levitt's movements because it's real strain. That physical authenticity was central to Nolan's vision of how dreams should behave, not like fantasies, but like hostile terrain. Equally important was Nolan's emotional anchor. For all its intellectual bravado, Inception hinges on grief. Cobb isn't driven by curiosity or power, but by loss. Specifically, the inability to let go of a memory that poisons everything it touches. Nolan has said the film is, at heart, about the damage of unresolved guilt. That's why the mechanics of dream sharing never eclipse the human cost. Every layer of the dream world circles back to a single, intimate wound. Without that, the film collapses into a puzzle box. With it, the spectacle has something to ache around. Warner Brothers' role in this can't be overstated. The studio didn't just finance the film, it protected Nolan's authorship. He wrote the screenplay himself, resisted test audience dilution, and delivered a film that refuses to over-explain its final moment. That trust, rare then, rarer now, allowed Inception to exist on its own terms. No sequel bait, no post-credit wink, just an ending that dares the audience to sit with uncertainty. Nolan didn't want answers, he wanted obsession, discussion, rewatching. The kind of engagement that lingers long after the screen cuts to black. Seen through this lens, Inception isn't a flex of intelligence. It's a declaration of faith in audiences, in craft, and in the idea that blockbuster cinema doesn't have to talk down to be thrilling. Nolan's vision was precise, demanding, and unapologetically personal. And every creative choice, from the emphasis on practical effects to the emotional weight of memory, flows from that central belief. But a vision is only as strong as its blueprint. To understand how Inception sustains this intricate balance between logic and emotion, you have to look at the script itself, how the story was built, rewritten, and refined until complexity became clarity rather than chaos. The screenplay for Inception didn't arrive fully formed. It was wrestled into existence over years, rewritten again and again, until the story obeyed its own laws. Christopher Nolan began drafting the script long before Batman entered his life, originally imagining it as a horror concept about dreams gone wrong. That early version leaned heavily into surrealism, shifting logic, unstable identities, nightmare imagery, but something wasn't clicking. The ideas were rich, yet the emotional through line was thin. Nolan shelved it. not because it failed, but because it wasn't ready to carry the weight he wanted it to bear. What unlocked the script was structure. Nolan realized the film needed rules as rigid as mathematics. Dreams couldn't behave like abstract poetry, they had to function like engineered spaces. That insight reshaped everything. He began designing the narrative the way one would plan a heist roles assigned, objectives clear, complications escalating with precision. The genre pivot wasn't cosmetic. By framing the story as a crime operation, Nolan gave audiences a familiar framework to navigate an unfamiliar concept. You might not understand dream sharing, but you understand a team with a plan that's about to go wrong. The writing process became an exercise in controlled complexity. Nolan famously diagrams his scripts, mapping cause and effect with almost architectural discipline. In Inception, every exposition scene pulls double duty. When a character explains how dream levels work, the dialogue also reveals personality, motivation, or emotional damage. Cobb's explanations aren't neutral lectures. They're confessions disguised as instruction. He teaches others the rules because he's trying to convince himself he still believes in them. That layering is why the film can be dense without feeling inert. Information always arrives attached to human need. One of the script's boldest choices is its manipulation of time. Different dream levels operate at different speeds, and Nolan integrates that concept directly into the narrative rhythm. The deeper the characters go, the more stretched time becomes, and the more compressed the storytelling feels. Scenes cross-cut across levels, forcing the audience to track simultaneous timelines with different stakes. On the page, this was a nightmare to manage, but Nolan wrote with the edit in mind, building sequences that could interlock like gears. The script doesn't just describe events, it anticipates how they'll be assembled. Dialogue in Inception is deliberately functional, sometimes even blunt. That's not a flaw, it's strategy. Nolan avoids ornate speech because clarity is survival here. Characters speak in clean, declarative sentences, often under pressure. Yet within that economy, he sneaks in thematic weight. An idea is like a virus, Cobb says early on. Simple phrasing, dangerous implication. That line becomes the spine of the entire film, echoing through every choice that follows. Nolan understands that one strong metaphor beats 10 poetic monologues when the story is this dense. The emotional rewrite that transformed the script was the decision to center everything on guilt and memory. Early drafts treated the dream world as the star. Later versions realized the real danger wasn't being lost in a dream, it was being unable to let go of one. Mal's role expanded, becoming less a plot device and more a psychological scar that bleeds into every layer of the story. She isn't an antagonist in the traditional sense. She's unresolved trauma given form. Writing her this way allowed Nolan to fuse internal conflict with external threat, a move that gives the spectacle its bite. Nolan's non-linear instincts are present but restrained. Unlike Memento, which fractures chronology aggressively, Inception keeps its primary timeline intact while embedding complexity inside it. Flashbacks are used sparingly, almost surgically. Each return to the past answers a question raised earlier, then plants a deeper one. The script trusts the audience to assemble meaning without handholding. That trust is risky, but it's also why the film invites repeat viewings. You're not catching plot holes on rewatch, you're catching intention. The ending is the script's most controversial decision, and the most honest. Nolan resisted studio pressure to clarify the final image, choosing ambiguity over closure. On the page, the ending isn't written as a twist, it's written as a question. The script stops, not resolves. That choice reflects the film's core belief: certainty is a luxury, not a reward. By denying a definitive answer, Nolan ensures the story continues outside the theater, living in debate and interpretation. The screenplay doesn't end the dream, it releases it. All of this only works because the script balances intellect with propulsion. Scenes move, stakes escalate, even exposition is paced like action. Nolan writes with momentum in mind, always pushing forward, always building toward collapse. That kinetic energy is why the film never feels like homework. You're learning the rules at the same speed the characters are breaking them, but a script this precise needs the right people to inhabit it. The roles are sharply defined, almost archetypal, and casting them correctly would determine whether the film felt human or mechanical. The next chapter begins where the writing leaves off in the casting room, where ideas meet faces, voices, and bodies capable of carrying this impossible story. Casting Inception wasn't about star power alone, it was about credibility. Nolan needed actors who could sell the emotional truth of an idea-heavy world without stopping the film dead to explain it. If the audience didn't believe these people belonged inside their roles, the entire illusion would collapse. So the casting process became an extension of the screenplay's philosophy, clarity, precision, and trust. Leonardo DiCaprio was always the gravitational center. Nolan wanted someone who could anchor the film emotionally while navigating dense exposition without sounding like a lecturer. DiCaprio had just come off Revolutionary Road and Shutter Island performances steeped in psychological fracture and internalized pain. That mattered. Cobb isn't an action hero, he's a man running from his own mind. DiCaprio brought a bruised intensity that made Cobb's grief feel lived in rather than theoretical. More importantly, he could make obsession sympathetic. You don't just understand Cobb's need to get home, you feel why he can't let go. Around that core, Nolan built an ensemble designed to function like a machine, each actor cast not only for individual strength, but for contrast. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was chosen as Arthur because he projects control, calm, precision. He's the guy who double-checks the math while everyone else improvises. Gordon-Levitt's performance history leaned toward intelligence and restraint, which made Arthur's physicality all the more surprising later on. That contrast was intentional. Nolan wanted the audience to underestimate him and then watch him adapt under impossible conditions. Elliot Page's casting as Ariadne was one of the film's smartest structural decisions. Ariadne isn't just a character, she's the audience's proxy. She asks the questions viewers are asking, challenges Cobb when things feel off, and refuses to accept emotional half-truths. Page brought an alert, grounded energy that prevented the role from becoming purely functional. There's curiosity here, but also moral clarity. When Ariadne pushes Cobb to confront his guilt, it doesn't feel scripted, it feels earned, because Page plays intelligence as instinct, not exposition. Tom Hardy's Eames was cast as disruption. Nolan needed someone who could puncture the film's seriousness without undermining its stakes. Hardy's charisma is loose, almost mischievous, and that looseness becomes a pressure valve. Eames lies, jokes, and improvises, but never carelessly. Hardy plays him like a professional who enjoys chaos because he knows how to survive it. That energy offsets the film's rigidity and keeps the ensemble from becoming sterile. Every heist needs a wild card. Hardy understood that immediately. Ken Watanabe's involvement added quiet authority. As Saito, he represents consequence, money, power. The real world pressing in on the dream, Watanabe carries weight without volume. His presence signals that the stakes extend beyond Cobb's personal redemption. Nolan cast him not just for gravitas, but for stillness. Saito doesn't need to dominate scenes, he just needs to exist within them, and Watanabe does exactly that. Marion Cotillard's casting as Mao was the most delicate decision of all. This role couldn't tip into melodrama. Mao had to feel seductive, dangerous, loving, and horrifying, sometimes within the same scene. Cotillard brought a natural ambiguity that made Mao unreadable in the best way. You believe she was once real. You believe Cobb loved her, and when she becomes destructive, it feels tragic rather than villainous. Nolan didn't want a ghost. He wanted a memory that refuses to behave. Cotillard embodied that tension perfectly. What's remarkable about the ensemble is how little redundancy exists. Each character occupies a distinct emotional and functional lane. No one overlaps. No one fades into background noise. That balance doesn't happen by accident. Nolan cast for rhythm as much as talent. How voices sound together, how energies collide. Watch any group scene and notice how the dialogue passes like a baton. No one rushes to steal focus. The film breathes because the cast understands restraint. There were, of course, alternate possibilities. Several major actors were considered at various stages, but Nolan prioritized chemistry over novelty. He wasn't assembling the loudest lineup possible. He was assembling a team that could disappear into a system without becoming invisible. That distinction defines the film's tone. Star power serves the story rather than advertising it. The casting choices also reflect Nolan's preference for actors who commit fully to conceptual material. Every performer here treats the rules of the world as sacred. No winking, no ironic distance. That seriousness is contagious. Once the actors believe, the audience follows. By the time cameras rolled, Inception wasn't just well cast, it was precisely cast. Each role filled by someone who understood not only their character, but the function they served within the film's larger architecture. And that precision pays off most clearly when you examine the performances themselves. How these actors translate dense ideas into emotional behavior that feels immediate, human, and unforgettable. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in Inception carries a quiet burden. He has to make an abstract puzzle feel personal. Cobb could have been a schematic grief sketched in broad strokes, motivation explained through dialogue. DiCaprio refuses that route. He plays Cobb like a man permanently bracing for impact, someone who never fully relaxes because memory might ambush him at any second. Watch his posture, slightly hunched, defensive. Even in moments of supposed calm, his body tells the truth before the script does. This is a man living inside unfinished business. What DiCaprio understands and leans into hard is that Cobb isn't driven by curiosity or ambition. He's driven by avoidance. He keeps moving because stopping means confronting Mal. That tension shapes every scene. When Cobb explains dream mechanics, there's impatience underneath, as if teaching others is a way to keep his own thoughts at bay. DiCaprio threads that anxiety through even the most technical dialogue, turning exposition into emotional leakage. You're not just learning rules, you're watching a man frantically control a system because his inner one is broken. His chemistry with Marion Cotillard is where the performance sharpens into something dangerous. Their scenes together pulse with contradiction, love and resentment, desire and terror. Cotillard plays Mal like a memory that knows it's a weapon, and DiCaprio reacts with a mix of longing and dread that never resolves. He wants her gone. He can't let her go. That contradiction is the engine of the film, and DiCaprio never simplifies it. When he looks at Mal, you see a man reliving a mistake in real time. Regret looping endlessly. There's a key restraint in DiCaprio's approach. He doesn't beg for sympathy. Cobb is often curt, even cold. He lies. He manipulates. He withholds truth. DiCaprio allows those flaws to sit uncomfortably without apology. That choice pays off later, when the emotional weight finally surfaces. By holding back early, the moments of vulnerability hit harder. When Cobb admits his role in Mal's death, it doesn't feel like a reveal. It feels like a confession he's been avoiding for years, and the relief is as painful as the guilt. Joseph Gordon-Levitt approaches Arthur from the opposite direction. Where Cobb is emotionally chaotic, Arthur is disciplined to the point of repression. Gordon-Levitt plays him with clean lines, measured speech, controlled movements, minimal emotional leakage. But that restraint isn't emptiness. It's professionalism taken to an extreme. Arthur believes in procedure because procedure keeps fear manageable. When things spiral, he doesn't panic, he recalibrates. That composure becomes the film's stabilizing force, especially as the dream levels collapse into chaos. The brilliance of Gordon-Levitt's performance emerges in how he adapts. As gravity disappears and plans unravel, Arthur's control doesn't crack, it transforms. His physicality takes over where dialogue leaves off. The famous hallway fight works not because it's flashy, but because it feels earned. Arthur doesn't suddenly become an action hero. He problem solves with his body the same way he does with his mind. Gordon-Levitt sells that continuity, making the impossible feel methodical rather than miraculous. Elliot Page's Ariadne carries a different responsibility. She has to question the narrative without breaking it. Page plays curiosity as instinct, not naivety. Ariadne is smart enough to learn the rules quickly, and perceptive enough to notice when Cobb is lying by omission. Page's performance is grounded, alert, emotionally present. When Ariadne pushes back, it doesn't feel like a script device. It feels like ethical reflex. She sees the cost of Cobb's denial before he's willing to name it. There's a subtle strength in how Page handles silence. Ariadne listens more than she speaks, and when she does speak, it lands with purpose. Her confrontations with Cobb aren't explosive, they're surgical. Page strips away pretense with calm insistence, forcing the truth into daylight. That balanced compassion, without indulgence, keeps the film from drowning in male angst. Ariadne becomes the conscience of the operation, and Page plays her without sentimentality. Tom Hardy's Eames injects a different energy entirely. Where others operate with tension coiled tight, Hardy loosens the knot. His performance is playful, but never careless. Eames enjoys the game, enjoys bending identities, enjoys poking at the system. Hardy's charm masks precision. Every joke is strategic. Every smirk hides competence. That duality prevents Eames from becoming comic relief. He's funny because he's confident, not because the film needs a laugh. Hardy's choices also deepen the film's themes. Eames is the character most comfortable with fluid identity, and Hardy leans into that with relish. Accents shift, personas blur. There's pleasure in performance itself. In a film about constructed realities, Eames understands the lie better than anyone and thrives inside it. Hardy makes that insight feel instinctual rather than philosophical. What unites these performances is commitment. No one plays irony. No one distances themselves from the concept. Every actor treats the dream world as lived-in reality, which allows the emotional stakes to register even when logic bends. Nolan's direction demands precision, but it's the actors who supply humanity. They don't explain the ideas, they behave inside them. By the time the film reaches its most emotionally exposed moments, the groundwork is complete. The audience trusts these characters because the performances never ask for shortcuts. Grief looks like avoidance. Control looks like rigidity. Curiosity looks like moral urgency. Each performance occupies its own emotional frequency, creating harmony rather than noise. Yet even the strongest leads don't carry a film alone. Inception works because its supporting cast fills in the negative space, adding texture, tension, and rhythm that elevate the ensemble beyond its individual parts. And that's where the next layer of the film quietly asserts its power. What Inception understands and executes with surgical precision is that a concept this dense collapses without a supporting cast that feels essential rather than decorative. These characters aren't padding the edges of the frame, they're load-bearing beams. Remove any one of them, and the entire structure wobbles. Ken Watanabe's Saito operates almost entirely through implication. He isn't loud. He doesn't explain himself, he watches. Watanabe plays Saito like a man accustomed to being obeyed, which gives the character quiet menace without a single raised voice. There's an economy to his performance that mirrors the film's own discipline. When Saito enters a scene, the temperature shifts. Stakes solidify. This isn't about dreams anymore. It's about consequences that follow you back into waking life. What makes Watanabe's work effective is restraint. Saito could have been a generic financier archetype. Instead, Watanabe imbues him with patience and gravity. His silences feel deliberate, as though he's always calculating value, of people, of risk, of outcomes. That calm becomes unsettling in later moments, when vulnerability creeps in. When Saito weakens, the shift is subtle but devastating. Power, Nolan suggests, doesn't make you immune to fear, it just delays it. Cillian Murphy's Robert Fisher is the emotional wildcard of the ensemble. He isn't part of the team, he's the target. That distinction matters. Murphy plays Fisher not as a villain or an obstacle, but as a wounded heir desperate for approval he never received. His performance leans inward, almost fragile. You sense isolation in the way he moves through spaces surrounded by protection, yet fundamentally alone. Murphy doesn't overplay the trauma, he lets it hum quietly beneath the surface. The brilliance of Murphy's work lies in how receptive he is. Fisher isn't manipulating others, he's being manipulated. That requires openness. Murphy allows confusion, doubt, and longing to register honestly, which makes the act of Inception feel invasive rather than clever. The film doesn't celebrate the manipulation, it interrogates it. And Murphy's vulnerability is what gives that interrogation moral weight. Without his performance, the ethical dimension collapses. Michael Caine's role is small but foundational. As Miles, he represents moral grounding and emotional memory. Caine plays him with warmth that feels earned rather than sentimental. Every scene he's in carries the weight of history. Shared meals, shared regrets, unspoken concern. Caine doesn't lecture, he nudges, he warns without demanding. His presence gives Cobb a connection to reality that isn't transactional, and that contrast matters in a world built on deception. Caine's scenes also serve as emotional punctuation. The film pauses when he appears, allowing breath between intellectual onslaughts. That pacing function is easy to overlook, but crucial. Without those moments of grounded humanity, Inception risks suffocating under its own ambition. Caine provides oxygen. Dilip Rao's Yusuf injects practicality and warmth into the ensemble. He's the one closest to the mechanics of dreaming itself, and Rao plays him with understated charm. Yusuf doesn't posture, he works. His confidence comes from expertise rather than ego. That grounded approach makes the more fantastical elements feel plausible. When Yusuf says something will work, you believe him? Not because the script demands it, but because Rao's performance radiates competence. There's also humor here, but it's never forced. Yusuf's dry reactions and small gestures offer relief without undermining tension. He feels like someone who has seen enough chaos to stay calm when it arrives. That lived-in quality deepens the sense that this dream world has rules, history, and professionals who understand it. Tom Berenger's brief appearance as Browning deserves mention for its efficiency. He establishes emotional conflict with minimal screen time, embodying the cold authority Fisher spends his life trying to please. Berenger doesn't need complexity, he needs presence, and he delivers it. His scenes linger in memory because they define the emotional void the entire operation exploits. What makes the supporting cast exceptional is how cleanly each performance integrates into the whole. No one fights for attention, no one feels underwritten. Each actor understands their narrative function and commits fully to it. That collective discipline allows Nolan's intricate construction to hold. The ensemble also reinforces one of the film's core ideas: identity is relational. Characters are defined not just by who they are, but by how they interact within systems: familial, professional, psychological. The supporting cast embodies those systems, surrounding the leads with pressures that shape behavior and consequence. By the time the story descends into its deepest dream layers, the audience isn't juggling faces or forgetting motivations. Everyone is where they should be, doing exactly what the story needs. That clarity is rare in ensemble blockbusters, especially ones this ambitious. And all of it unfolds within environments that feel astonishingly tangible. Cities bend, hallways rotate, snow fortresses rise from imagination, but none of it feels weightless. That's because the film's physical world was crafted with the same obsessive intent as its characters, through production design that treats dreams not as abstractions, but as places you could almost step into. The physical world of Inception doesn't announce itself as fantasy. That's the trick. Production design here isn't about spectacle for its own sake, it's about persuasion. Every environment needs to feel solid enough that, when it breaks, the rupture feels violent rather than decorative. Nolan's directive to his design team was deceptively simple: build dreams that obey reality until they don't. And that philosophy shapes every inch of the film's visual identity. Production designer Guy Hendricks Dias approached the film like an architect, not a surrealist. Dream spaces weren't imagined as abstract mindscapes, but as plausible locations with just enough wrongness to unsettle. Paris looks like Paris. A hotel looks like a hotel. A snow fortress feels militarized and functional rather than fantastical. This grounded baseline is essential. If everything were strange from the start, nothing would feel meaningful when gravity flips or cities fold in on themselves. Normality becomes the canvas for distortion. One of the film's most quietly impressive achievements is how it differentiates dream layers through design rather than exposition. Each level has its own visual logic. The Rainy City level is dense, claustrophobic, and oppressive tight streets, low ceilings, muted tones. It feels hostile, constantly pressing inward. The hotel level, by contrast, is clean and controlled, defined by symmetry and polished surfaces. Everything looks orderly, which makes its eventual collapse feel like a violation of rules rather than an escalation of chaos. The snow fortress is stark and exposed, all sharp angles and white space, a place where hiding feels impossible. You don't need to be told where you are, the environment tells you. Color plays a crucial role in this differentiation. Nolan avoids expressionistic palettes, favoring restrained, naturalistic tones. When color does assert itself, it carries intention. Cool blues dominate the deeper dream layers, subtly reinforcing emotional distance and isolation. Warmer hues appear in memories of Mao and domestic spaces, tying warmth to loss rather than comfort. The palette doesn't shout symbolism, it whispers it. And that restraint makes the moments of visual excess land harder. Costume design works in tandem with the environments, reinforcing character psychology rather than drawing attention to itself. The team's suits aren't flashy, they're functional, uniform, almost anonymous. That anonymity matters. These characters are tools within a system, and their clothing reflects that professionalism. Cobb's attire barely changes throughout the film, mirroring his emotional stagnation. Ariadne's costumes evolve more visibly, reflecting her growing confidence and agency within the dream world. These shifts are subtle, but they accumulate. Props, too, carry narrative weight. The spinning top isn't just an object, it's an obsession given form. Its design is intentionally unremarkable. No ornate details, no mystical glow. That simplicity makes its symbolic power more unsettling. It looks like something you could lose in a drawer, forget on a table, yet it holds the film's most destabilizing question. The same goes for the briefcase rigs, the sedation equipment, the weapons. Everything looks industrial, practical, slightly worn. These aren't toys, they're tools of a morally gray trade. Perhaps the most daring production design choice is restraint itself. Nolan resists the temptation to make dreams visually flamboyant. There are no melting clocks, no impossible creatures wandering the streets. When reality bends like Paris folding over itself, it happens cleanly, almost mathematically. Buildings move with weight and logic, as if obeying unseen equations. That decision aligns perfectly with the film's thematic core. These dreams aren't expressions of whimsy. They're engineered constructs built to deceive. The rotating hallway set deserves special attention because it exemplifies Nolan's philosophy. Rather than simulate disorientation through camera tricks alone, the team built a massive, rotating corridor. That commitment to physical construction anchors the scene in reality, even as gravity vanishes. The walls scuff, the floor creaks, you feel the space fighting back. Production design here isn't background, it's an active participant in the action. Even small details reinforce the film's internal logic. Elevators in Cobb's subconscious are designed like memory vaults, each floor representing a different layer of repression. The minimalist design keeps focus on movement and descent rather than decoration. It's psychological architecture rendered physically. You understand Cobb's mental compartmentalization without a word of dialogue explaining it. What makes all of this work is cohesion. No element feels isolated or ornamental. Sets, costumes, props, and locations speak the same visual language, controlled, functional, believable. That unity allows the audience to surrender to the illusion. You're not watching a designer show off ideas. You're moving through a world that feels coherent enough to get lost in. And once you're lost, the camera takes over gliding, tracking, framing these spaces with precision that elevates design into storytelling. The environments don't just exist. They're observed, interpreted, and shaped by cinematography that knows exactly how to extract meaning from space, movement, and light. That's where the film's visual mastery fully locks into place. Cinematography is where Inception quietly asserts its authority, not by showing off, but by insisting on coherence. Wally Pfister, Nolan's longtime collaborator, shoots the film with a discipline that mirrors the story's obsession with rules. Every camera choice reinforces the idea that even when reality bends, it does so within a system. Nothing feels accidental. Nothing feels decorative. The images aren't asking to be admired, they're asking to be trusted. Pfister's visual philosophy here is grounded realism pushed to its breaking point. He avoids the glossy sheen typical of big-budget science fiction, favoring natural light, strong contrast, and physical depth. Faces are often partially shadowed, environments feel dense, and spaces have weight. This isn't a future imagined through neon and haze. It's the present, slightly wrong. That choice matters. When the impossible happens, it feels invasive rather than magical. Camera movement in Inception is deliberate and purposeful. Nolan and Pfister resist restless motion. The camera observes more than it chases. When it does move, the movement carries intention, tracking characters through space, aligning the audience's perspective with momentum rather than spectacle. In the early sequences, shots are composed cleanly, almost conservatively. As the narrative descends into deeper dream layers, the camera grows more kinetic, responding to destabilization rather than initiating it. The visual language evolves with the story's psychological state. Lens choice plays a subtle but critical role. Pfister often favors wider lenses, keeping characters embedded within their environments. This isn't about isolating faces in shallow focus. It's about context. Characters are small pieces inside vast systems, cities, architectures, operations larger than themselves. Even in intimate moments, the world presses in. That compositional choice reinforces the film's themes of control and entrapment. No one exists in isolation, not even inside their own mind. Lighting remains strikingly naturalistic, even in dream spaces. Interiors are lit as they would be in reality. Lamps cast pools of warmth. Overhead lights flatten spaces. Windows provide directional sources. This consistency keeps the dream world anchored. When lighting does shift, such as the stark whites of the snow fortress or the artificial glow of the hotel, it reflects environmental logic rather than emotional exaggeration. The images don't tell you how to feel. They let you discover it. One of Pfister's most impressive achievements is clarity during complexity. The cross-cutting finale spans multiple locations, timescales, and physical laws. Lesser cinematography would drown in confusion. Here, visual grammar keeps everything legible. Each dream layer has its own visual identity, reinforced through composition, lighting, and camera behavior. The audience always knows where they are, even when the narrative stacks realities on top of one another. That clarity isn't accidental, it's engineered. The rotating hallway sequence exemplifies this precision. Pfister doesn't rely on frenetic cutting or disorienting angles. Instead, he allows the physicality of the set to do the work. The camera often stays level as the world turns, creating a paradoxical calm amid chaos. Your eye understands the geometry even as gravity disappears. That restraint makes the scene feel credible rather than chaotic. You're not watching a trick, you're watching a problem being solved in real time. Exterior photography reinforces the film's global scale without romanticizing it. Cities are shown as functional spaces, busy, dense, impersonal. Paris is beautiful, but it's also lived in. Tokyo feels corporate and cold. Mombasa is sun-bleached and urgent, shot with handheld immediacy that contrasts sharply with the controlled interiors elsewhere. These shifts aren't just aesthetic. They reflect Cobb's emotional state as he moves between worlds that either contain him or expose him. The Snow Fortress sequence introduces a different visual rhythm entirely. Pfister draws from war film iconography. Long lenses, compressed space, stark contrast to ground the action in familiar cinematic language. The choice is strategic. By invoking the visual grammar of military thrillers, the film makes an absurd scenario feel tactically plausible. The dream doesn't feel like fantasy. It feels like a mission under extreme conditions. Visual effects integration deserves credit precisely because it's invisible. Pfister shoots with the assumption that effects will enhance, not replace, the image. CGI extends environments, removes rigging, and enables impossible transformations. But the lighting, grain, and camera movement remain consistent. You never feel the seam between what's real and what's augmented. That seamlessness reinforces the film's central anxiety. If you can't tell where reality ends, how do you trust your senses? Framing choices also reflect character psychology. Cobb is often shot boxed in doorways, windows, narrow corridors slicing the frame. Ariadne, by contrast, is frequently framed with more open space around her, emphasizing possibility and curiosity. Arthur's compositions are balanced and symmetrical, mirroring his need for order. These patterns aren't flashy, but they accumulate meaning over time. The camera becomes an interpreter, quietly translating internal states into visual form. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of Inception's cinematography is its refusal to editorialize. Pfister doesn't underline emotion with visual excess. He presents the world as it is, or as it appears to be, and trusts the audience to feel the weight of what's happening. That confidence is rare, and it's why the film holds up under scrutiny. The images don't age because they aren't chasing trends. They're grounded in craft. What the eye absorbs, the ear completes. Because for all the visual discipline at work here, Inception wouldn't exert its grip without sound. The pulse, the pressure, the low-frequency dread that seeps into your body before your brain catches up. The film doesn't just show you a dream, it makes you feel trapped inside one. And that sensation begins with music and sound design that refuse to let go. Sound is the invisible hand guiding your pulse through Inception. You can look away from the screen and still feel the film tightening around you. That's not accidental. Nolan treats sound as architecture, something that shapes space, time, and emotion simultaneously. And at the center of that architecture sits Hans Zimmer's score, a piece of work that doesn't decorate scenes so much as apply pressure to them. Zimmer didn't approach Inception like a traditional science fiction assignment. There's no futuristic shimmer, no melodic hero theme meant to soar. Instead, the score feels heavy, dense, weighted. Zimmer builds with low frequencies that sit in your chest rather than your ears. The music doesn't lift you, it pins you. That choice aligns perfectly with the film's emotional core. This isn't a story about liberation through dreams, it's about being trapped by them. The score's most recognizable element, the infamous brass blasts, has been endlessly imitated, but context matters. These aren't triumphant cues, they're alarms. Sonic reminders that time is collapsing, that pressure is mounting. Zimmer uses repetition to induce anxiety rather than comfort. Motifs return, not to reassure, but to remind you that escape is narrowing. The music behaves like the dreams themselves, looping, escalating, refusing resolution. What's fascinating is how deeply the score is tied to the film's mechanics. Time dilation isn't just explained through dialogue, it's embedded in the music's structure. Zimmer manipulates tempo and rhythm to mirror the layered dream states, stretching and compressing sound, just as the narrative stretches and compresses time. Notes linger longer than expected. Phrases slow to a crawl, then surge forward. You don't intellectually track the shift. You feel it. The use of Edith Piaf's Non, Je ne regrette rien is one of the film's most elegant conceptual moves. On the surface, it's a plot device, a cue to synchronize kicks between dream levels. But Zimmer takes that song and fractures it, folding its rhythm into the score itself. The deeper the dream, the slower the song becomes, its structure elongated until it transforms into texture rather than melody. Music becomes mechanism. Emotion becomes math. It's audacious, and it works. Silence, too, is a critical tool. Nolan isn't afraid of letting sound drop out entirely. In key moments, the absence of music heightens tension more effectively than any crescendo could. You become aware of breathing, of footsteps, of the room you're sitting in. That awareness mirrors the character's vulnerability when control slips away. Silence isn't empty here, it's exposed. Sound design complements the score with equal intention. Gunshots don't crack, they thud. Explosions feel muffled, as if heard through layers of consciousness. Environmental sounds are slightly off, subtly distorted without calling attention to themselves. These choices reinforce the dream logic without tipping into surrealism. You sense something's wrong, but you can't quite name it. That unease accumulates. The mixing prioritizes immersion over clarity in the conventional sense. Dialogue is sometimes buried beneath score and ambient noise, forcing you to lean in. That decision has divided audiences, but it's consistent with Nolan's philosophy. Characters aren't delivering information for comfort. They're speaking under pressure, inside unstable realities. The soundscape reflects that instability. Understanding becomes an active process. Zimmer's restraint is as important as his power. There are no lyrical melodies begging to be remembered. Instead, the score operates like a current, always present, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes barely perceptible. It seeps into the film's identity so completely that separating image from sound feels impossible. Try imagining the rotating hallway without that pulsing rhythm. It collapses. The emotional payoff of the score arrives not in bombast, but in release. In the final moments, when ambiguity replaces urgency, the music softens, not into certainty, but into reflection. Zimmer doesn't tell you how to feel about the ending. He creates space for interpretation, echoing Nolan's refusal to provide easy answers. The sound doesn't resolve the dream, it lets it linger. Together, score and sound design turn Inception into a physical experience. You don't just watch the film, you absorb it. The pressure, the dread, the momentum all live in the audio. It's why the movie stays with you even after details blur. Long after you forget specific plot mechanics, you remember the feeling, that low hum, that sense of time slipping sideways. And yet, as meticulously crafted as the film feels on screen and in your ears, getting there was anything but effortless. The real-world journey of making Inception, the logistics, the risks, the near disasters, reveals just how precarious this balance of ambition and execution truly was. Because behind every polished frame lies a production that had to fight gravity in its own way. For a film obsessed with control, the making of Inception was a constant negotiation with chaos. Nolan's ambition wasn't theoretical. It was logistical, mechanical, physical. This wasn't a production that leaned on post-production to solve problems later. Problems had to be solved on set, in real locations, under real constraints. And that decision turned the shoot into a high-wire act where precision wasn't optional. It was survival. The production spanned multiple countries, each chosen not for visual novelty, but for narrative function. Tokyo, Paris, London, Calgary, Los Angeles, and Morocco weren't backdrops. They were structural components. Nolan wanted environments that carried their own texture and history, places that felt inhabited long before the cameras arrived. That realism came at a cost, moving a large crew across continents while maintaining continuity, both visual and logistical, demanded relentless planning. The schedule was tight, the margin for error thinner still. Morocco posed one of the earliest challenges. The Mombasa chase sequence, shot in Tangier, required handheld immediacy and controlled chaos. Narrow streets, unpredictable crowds, and intense heat created conditions that couldn't be fully controlled. Nolan embraced that volatility. The camera weaves through bodies and traffic with urgency because that urgency was real. The environment pushes back. That friction gives the sequence its breathless quality, but it also tested the crew's ability to adapt on the fly. Paris brought a different kind of pressure. The folding city sequence looks like pure visual effects bravado, but much of it was grounded in practical planning. Streets had to be cleared, traffic patterns adjusted, Camera placements rehearsed to align perfectly with later digital augmentation. Nolan shot as much in-camera as possible, treating CGI as enhancement rather than foundation. That meant every practical plate had to be exact. One misaligned shot could unravel an entire sequence. Precision wasn't just aesthetic, it was financial. Then there was the rotating hallway. This wasn't a conceptual flourish, it was a mechanical monster. The set weighed tons, built like a massive hamster wheel capable of rotating 360 degrees. Safety was a constant concern. Every movement had to be rehearsed repeatedly before cameras rolled. Joseph Gordon-Levitt trained extensively to perform inside the structure, learning how to orient his body as gravity shifted unpredictably. The physical toll was real, bruises were expected, fatigue was constant, but the payoff was authenticity you can't fake. The Snow Fortress sequence in Alberta introduced yet another layer of complication. Extreme cold affects everything: equipment, stamina, timing. Cameras behave differently. Batteries die faster, fingers go numb. Nolan leaned into the environment rather than fighting it. The harsh conditions bleed into the imagery, giving the sequence a severity that feels earned rather than staged. The actors weren't pretending to be uncomfortable. They were uncomfortable. That discomfort reads on screen. Throughout the shoot, Nolan's directing style remained consistent: minimal coverage, maximum preparation. He doesn't overshoot. He knows what he wants before the camera rolls, which places immense pressure on everyone involved. There's little room for improvisation. Not because Nolan lacks flexibility, but because the machinery of the film is too complex to accommodate guesswork. That discipline creates tension, but it also fosters trust. Cast and crew understand that when Nolan calls action, it's because everything is aligned. Despite the scale, the set culture was remarkably focused. There's little evidence of chaos or ego-driven conflict. Nolan's calm demeanor sets the tone. He doesn't shout. He doesn't rush. That steadiness becomes a stabilizing force, especially during technically demanding sequences. When problems arise, and they always do, the response is methodical rather than frantic. That atmosphere matters. Films of this complexity can fracture under stress. Inception holds because leadership remains consistent. Happy accidents did occur, but Nolan only embraced them when they served the system. Environmental elements, unexpected light, spontaneous movement were incorporated selectively. Nothing was allowed to undermine clarity. The production philosophy was simple: surprise is welcome, confusion is not. That distinction kept the film legible even as it stacked realities on top of one another. Post-production, while extensive, wasn't about salvaging footage. It was about refinement. Visual effects teams worked closely with Nolan to integrate CGI seamlessly into practical plates. The goal wasn't spectacle, it was invisibility. Effects had to feel inevitable, not impressive. Editing focused on rhythm and comprehension, ensuring that cross-cutting between dream layers maintained momentum without sacrificing orientation. The complexity was locked in during pre-production. Post was about polishing the machine, meaningfully not redesigning it. Perhaps the greatest risk of Inception's production wasn't technical, it was commercial. An original, idea-driven blockbuster with no franchise safety net is a gamble, no matter who's directing. Every choice Nolan made increased that risk. Practical effects cost more, location shooting adds unpredictability. Ambiguity alienates some audiences, but Nolan wasn't chasing comfort, he was chasing conviction. When filming wrapped, Inception existed as something increasingly rare, a studio film that looked and felt singular. That singularity would soon be tested, not in controlled environments or rotating hallways, but in the marketplace. Because ambition doesn't matter if audiences don't show up. And the next phase of Inception's story is about numbers, expectations, and whether original storytelling still had a place at the box office. When Inception hit theaters in July 2010, it wasn't just opening a movie, it was testing a theory. Could an original, intellectually demanding blockbuster still pull massive audiences in an industry increasingly addicted to familiarity? Warner Brothers had marketed the film carefully, leaning into mystery rather than explanation. Trailers emphasized imagery and mood over plot, trusting curiosity to do the heavy lifting. That strategy was either going to ignite interest or leave audiences cold. There was very little middle ground. The opening weekend delivered the first answer. Inception debuted strongly, earning over $60 million domestically in its first few days. That number mattered not just because it was high, but because of what it represented. This wasn't a sequel. It wasn't adapted from a novel or comic. It didn't promise easy answers. Audiences showed up anyway. The turnout validated Nolan's belief that viewers were willing to work for their entertainment, provided the experience felt worth the effort. The film's production budget sat around $160 million, a significant investment for an original property. Add global marketing costs, and expectations were high. But Inception didn't just recoup its costs, it thrived. Its domestic run was marked by strong legs, holding audience interest week after week rather than collapsing after the initial rush. That sustained performance signaled word-of-mouth momentum. People weren't just watching the film, they were talking about it, debating it, arguing about the ending in parking lots and online forums. Internationally, the response was even more emphatic. Inception played exceptionally well overseas, particularly in Europe and Asia, where Nolan's reputation for cerebral spectacle had already taken root. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had earned over $800 million worldwide. For an original science fiction concept with no pre-sold brand recognition, that figure was seismic. It placed Inception among the highest-grossing films of the year and quietly rewrote assumptions about what audiences would support. What makes the box office story compelling isn't just the raw total, it's the composition. Inception wasn't front-loaded. It didn't burn bright and fade fast. Its earnings curve reflected curiosity turning into commitment. Repeat viewings became common, driven by the film's layered structure and ambiguous finale. Viewers returned not for comfort, but for clarity, or at least the illusion of it. That repeat business is the holy grail of theatrical success, and Inception earned it without pandering. Home media extended that success further. Blu-ray and DVD sales were robust, fueled by the film's rewatchability and technical polish. Inception became a reference disc, something people used to test home theater systems, not just because it looked good, but because it sounded immersive. The film's life didn't end after its theatrical window. It settled into cultural circulation, discussed, dissected, revisited. From a studio perspective, Inception altered risk calculus. It demonstrated that originality didn't have to mean fragility. That complexity didn't automatically repel mass audiences. The film didn't just make money, it made a case. A case for directors as brands, for trust as a business strategy. Nolan emerged from the film not just as a successful filmmaker, but as a commercial force whose name alone could open a movie worldwide. That success also reframed marketing language. Studios took note of how Inception sold experience rather than explanation. Mystery became a tool again. Trailers could withhold rather than overshare. The film proved that audiences enjoyed being intrigued more than instructed. That influence rippled outward, shaping how other high-concept films were positioned in the years that followed. Yet commercial success doesn't automatically translate into critical consensus. Numbers tell one story, reception tells another. As Inception moved through its theatrical run, critics and audiences began engaging with it on a deeper level, praising its ambition, questioning its emotional resonance, arguing over its meaning. The box office proved people were watching. The next question was how they felt about what they'd seen. By the time Inception had cemented its box office success, the conversation around it was already shifting from, "Is this impressive?" to, "What does it actually mean?" Critical reception landed firmly in admiration, but not without friction. Reviewers recognized immediately that Nolan had delivered something rare, a large-scale film that demanded intellectual engagement without sacrificing momentum. Praise centered on ambition, craft, and confidence. But admiration didn't translate into unanimity. Inception wasn't a film critics simply agreed on. It was a film they argued about. Many critics responded to the film's precision with enthusiasm. The structure was called daring, the visual effects integrated rather than indulgent, the concept unusually disciplined for a summer blockbuster. Nolan's refusal to dilute complexity was widely celebrated. Reviewers pointed out that the film trusted audiences to keep up, an increasingly rare courtesy. The craft, cinematography, production design, score was treated as exemplary not because it dazzled, but because it served a coherent vision. This wasn't spectacle in search of meaning, it was meaning engineered through spectacle. At the same time, a recurring critique surfaced: emotional distance. Some critics argued that Inception impressed more than it moved. The mechanics fascinated them, but the characters felt secondary to the concept. Cobb's grief, they suggested, was intellectually understood rather than viscerally felt. This critique didn't dominate the discourse, but it lingered. The divide often came down to expectation. Viewers seeking emotional catharsis sometimes found the film cold. Those drawn to structure and theme found that restraint purposeful rather than limiting. Audience response mirrored that split, but with more passion. General audiences embraced the challenge, turning the film into a cultural event rather than a passive viewing experience. Conversations erupted around the ending almost immediately. The spinning top became a Rorschach test. Did it fall? Did it matter? Online forums, YouTube essays, and late-night debates flourished. Inception didn't just entertain, it activated. People didn't leave theaters satisfied or dissatisfied. They left curious, argumentative, energized. That engagement spilled into award season, where Inception occupied an unusual space. It wasn't treated like a typical blockbuster, nor was it embraced as a prestige drama. Instead, it hovered between categories. Too cerebral for pure escapism, too spectacular for traditional awards comfort zones. The film received multiple major nominations and wins in technical categories, where its achievements were undeniable. But its absence from top honors sparked debate. Some saw it as genre bias. Others saw it as recognition that innovation doesn't always fit established molds. Culturally, Inception embedded itself quickly. References appeared everywhere, from parody sketches to academic essays. The term Inception entered common language as shorthand for planting ideas. Visual motifs were echoed, imitated, sometimes outright copied. The low brass score became a sonic cliché precisely because it was so effective here. The film's influence spread not through imitation alone, but through permission. It gave other filmmakers license to be dense, ambiguous, unapologetically cerebral. Over time, critical reevaluation softened some early reservations. As distance grew, the emotional core gained clarity. Cobb's arc, once seen as underdeveloped, was reassessed as deliberately muted, a portrayal of grief expressed through denial rather than release. The film's restraint began to look less like coldness and more like discipline. What once felt withholding came to feel intentional. The endurance of Inception's reputation lies in its rewatchability. Each viewing reveals structure rather than surprises. You don't return for twists, you return for understanding. That's a rare quality. Many films lose power once you know where they're going. Inception gains it. The mechanics that once felt overwhelming become elegant. The emotional beats land with greater clarity. The ambiguity doesn't frustrate, it invites. The discourse around Inception never really ended. It evolved. From box office spectacle to critical lightning rod to cultural touchstone, the film settled into a space reserved for works that refused to be finalized. Its reception wasn't static praise, it was an ongoing conversation. And that conversation feeds directly into the film's lasting legacy, its themes, and the reason it still occupies such a prominent place in modern cinema. Because ultimately, Inception isn't remembered just for what it did in 2010, but for what it continues to ask of audiences long after the screen goes dark. Inception ultimately survives and endures because it isn't really about dreams. Dreams are the mechanism. Memory is the subject. Control is the illusion. At its core, the film asks a question that feels simple until you sit with it. What happens when the stories we tell ourselves become prisons instead of guides? Nolan doesn't answer that question directly. He builds a system around it and lets the audience wander inside. The most persistent theme running through the film is guilt, specifically, guilt disguised as logic. Cobb convinces himself that his actions are justified because they follow rules. He intellectualizes grief, compartmentalizes responsibility, turns emotional failure into a technical problem to be solved. That impulse feels uncomfortably human. The dream architecture isn't just a plot device, it's a visual metaphor for psychological defense mechanisms. Memories get buried. Trauma gets locked behind elevators. Pain gets labeled unsafe and sealed away. The deeper Cobb goes, the more obvious it becomes that avoidance, no matter how sophisticated, still corrodes. Control is the film's most seductive lie. Every character believes control equals safety. Arthur trusts procedure. Cobb trusts planning. Saito trusts leverage. Fisher trusts legacy. Even Ariadne, for all her moral clarity, believes understanding grants authority. The dreams allow these illusions to function until they don't. Gravity collapses. Time fractures. Carefully laid plans disintegrate. Nolan's message isn't that control is useless. It's that control without self-awareness becomes tyranny, especially when directed inward. Identity in Inception is fluid, constructed, performative. Eames embodies this openly, shifting personas with ease. Cobb resists it, clinging to a fixed self defined by loss. Fisher is shaped by expectations he never consented to. The film suggests that identity isn't something you discover, it's something you negotiate. And when that negotiation is hijacked, either by others or by unresolved memory, the result is paralysis. You keep spinning, you never land. The infamous ending crystallizes all of this. The spinning top isn't a puzzle to be solved, it's a provocation. Nolan deliberately reframes the question away from reality and toward relevance. Does Cobb care whether he's dreaming anymore? That's the point. The film argues that obsession with certainty can be more damaging than uncertainty itself. Cobb chooses emotional truth over epistemological proof. He walks away. The camera cuts. The film trusts you to sit with that choice rather than decode it. This refusal to provide closure is why Inception has aged so well. In a media landscape increasingly driven by answers, explanations, and algorithmic certainty, the film's ambiguity feels almost radical. It doesn't demand agreement. It demands engagement. Every rewatch reframes emphasis. Sometimes the film feels like a tragedy, sometimes like redemption, sometimes like a warning. That mutability is its strength. In the context of Nolan's career, Inception occupies a fascinating middle ground. It isn't as emotionally raw as Interstellar, nor as structurally austere as Dunkirk. It balances intellect and feeling with deliberate tension, never fully surrendering to either. That balance makes it uniquely rewatchable. It's dense without being opaque, ambitious without being indulgent. Nolan doesn't ask you to admire him. He asks you to keep up. The film's influence is undeniable. Countless movies and shows have borrowed its aesthetic, its sonic language, its narrative stacking. Few have matched its discipline. Inception didn't just popularize complexity, it demonstrated how to manage it. The lesson wasn't make things confusing, it was make confusion meaningful. Complexity serves theme here. Spectacle serves psychology. That distinction separates imitation from impact. If the film has a weakness, it's one of emotional accessibility. Some viewers will always feel held at arm's length. Nolan prioritizes structure over sentiment, restraint over catharsis. That choice is intentional, but not universally satisfying. And that's fine. Inception isn't designed to comfort. It's designed to unsettle, to make you question how much of your reality is habit, how many of your convictions are inherited, how often you mistake familiarity for truth. So who is Inception for? It's for viewers willing to engage actively rather than consume passively. For those who enjoy movies that don't finish their sentences. For audiences who appreciate craft not as ornament, but as argument. It rewards patience, curiosity, and rewatching. It doesn't punish confusion, it invites it. 15 years on, Inception remains a rare thing, a blockbuster that respects intelligence without fetishizing it, that embraces ambiguity without collapsing into emptiness. It's a film about ideas, how they form, how they spread, how they destroy, and it understands that the most dangerous ideas are the ones we refuse to examine, the ones that feel true simply because we've lived with them for too long. The final image lingers not because it withholds an answer, but because it reflects the viewer back at themselves. Do you need certainty to move forward? Or is the willingness to let go enough? That question doesn't fade when the screen goes black. It follows you out of the theater. It spins. It wobbles. And whether it falls or not is beside the point. If Inception unsettles people long after the credits roll, it's because it taps into a philosophical nerve most blockbusters never touch. Strip away the heists, the architecture, the mechanics, and what remains is a deeply uncomfortable question. How do you know that what you're experiencing is real, and why do you need to know? Nolan isn't flirting with philosophy for decoration here. He's dragging it into the bloodstream of a genre built on certainty and payoff, then refusing to offer relief. At its core, Inception wrestles with epistemology, the study of knowledge without ever naming it. The film keeps asking how beliefs are formed, how they harden into identity, and how fragile they actually are. Cobb doesn't lose his grip on reality because he lacks intelligence. He loses it because intelligence becomes a shield. He constructs airtight logic around a lie he cannot emotionally process. That's the danger Nolan keeps circling. Reason divorced from self-examination doesn't lead to truth. It leads to obsession. Dreams in Inception behave like belief systems. They feel coherent from the inside. They reward consistency. They punish doubt. Once you accept the rules, everything that follows makes sense, even if the premise itself is false. That's why the film's dream worlds aren't chaotic. They're orderly. comfortingly so. Nolan understands something unsettling about the human mind. We don't crave truth as much as we crave stability. A false certainty can feel safer than an unresolved reality. This is where the film's anxiety starts to feel modern, almost prophetic. Inception arrived at the beginning of a decade defined by fractured realities, algorithmic echo chambers, and self-reinforcing narratives. The idea that beliefs can be implanted, nurtured, and defended without awareness no longer feels like science fiction. It feels like daily life. Nolan doesn't frame Inception as mind control. He frames it as persuasion without consent, and that distinction makes it far more disturbing. Cobb's tragedy isn't that he can't tell dream from reality, it's that he doesn't trust his own emotional perception anymore. The totem becomes a crutch, a mechanical shortcut replacing introspection. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" he asks, "What does the object say?" Nolan is ruthless here. The tool meant to guarantee truth becomes another layer of denial. Certainty outsourced is still certainty avoided. The film's obsession with layers mirrors the way humans compartmentalize uncomfortable truths. We bury memories not because they're unclear, but because they're unbearable. Cobb's subconscious isn't chaotic because he's unstable. It's chaotic because he's too controlled. Every locked door, every guarded corridor, every violent projection is a defense mechanism disguised as order. Nolan visualizes repression not as darkness, but as over-engineering. Too many rules, too much structure, too little honesty. What makes Inception resonate philosophically is its refusal to frame doubt as weakness. Ariadne isn't punished for questioning, she's rewarded. Fisher isn't liberated by truth, but by reinterpretation, by reframing memory in a way that allows him to move forward. Nolan suggests that meaning matters more than accuracy. That belief isn't comforting, it's dangerous, but it's also deeply human. The ending, revisited through this lens, stops being a riddle and becomes a thesis. Cobb's decision to walk away from the spinning top isn't about ignorance, it's about choice. He chooses engagement over verification, presence over proof. Nolan doesn't claim this is objectively correct, he frames it as psychologically necessary. At some point, the demand for certainty becomes paralysis. Living requires a leap, not a calculation. This is why the question, "Is it real?" ultimately feels beside the point. The more interesting question is, why do we need it to be? Nolan understands that our fixation on reality often masks fear. Fear of loss, fear of responsibility, fear of accepting that meaning is something we actively construct rather than discover. Inception doesn't comfort that fear. It exposes it. There's also a quiet ethical undercurrent running beneath all of this. If beliefs can be planted, who gets to decide which ideas are acceptable? The film never lets the team off the hook for what they do to Fisher. The operation is framed as elegant, even necessary, but never innocent. Nolan refuses to resolve that moral tension. The success of the mission doesn't erase the violation, it complicates it. That discomfort is intentional. Clean answers would betray the premise. What Inception ultimately proposes is not a solution, but a warning. Reality isn't lost when it becomes uncertain. It's lost when certainty becomes unquestionable. The film doesn't argue that nothing is real. It argues that reality requires maintenance, attention, self-awareness, the courage to examine the ideas you live inside. And that's why the film keeps finding new relevance. In a world increasingly shaped by narratives that feel true because they're repeated, Inception feels less like a puzzle and more like a diagnostic tool. It asks whether the beliefs guiding your life were chosen or simply inherited, whether they free you or keep you spinning. The dream doesn't end when the movie does. It migrates into conversations, into arguments, into the quiet moment when you realize certainty feels good, but curiosity might be healthier. And from there, Inception's influence doesn't just live in philosophy. It explodes outward into internet culture, analysis obsession, and a generation trained to believe that movies aren't finished when the screen goes dark. Inception didn't just change how movies were made, it changed how movies were discussed. Almost overnight, it became fuel for a new kind of audience behavior, one that treated films not as closed texts, but as open systems begging to be decoded. This wasn't accidental. Nolan built a movie that didn't end, it echoed. And the internet was the perfect amplifier. By 2010, online film culture was already evolving, but Inception accelerated it. YouTube essays, Reddit threads, forum breakdowns, and Ending Explained, Videos didn't just respond to the film, they orbited it. The ambiguity wasn't a flaw to be corrected, it was an invitation. Nolan essentially handed audiences a puzzle without confirming whether a solution even existed. The result was obsession. Frame-by-frame analysis, sound design scrutiny, totem physics debates that bordered on the theological. What made Inception uniquely suited to meme and discourse culture was its clarity of symbols. The spinning top, the kick, the dream layers. These were immediately legible metaphors that could be abstracted, repurposed, and joked about without losing meaning. We Need to Go Deeper escaped the film and entered everyday language, becoming shorthand for overanalysis, escalation, or ironic self-awareness. That kind of cultural migration doesn't happen unless a film's ideas are both specific and flexible. The rise of explainer culture owes a quiet debt to Inception. Before it, ambiguity in mainstream cinema was often treated as pretension or failure. After it, ambiguity became content. People didn't just want answers, they wanted arguments. Competing interpretations became entertainment. The act of analysis became performative, communal, and monetizable. Inception didn't invent this ecosystem, but it legitimized it at blockbuster scale. Crucially, Nolan never stepped in to resolve the debate. No definitive interviews, no canon clarification, no official explanation. That silence mattered. By refusing to collapse interpretation into authority, Nolan preserved the film's elasticity. The audience wasn't wrong for disagreeing. They were participating correctly. The film became less an object to be consumed and more a space to inhabit. This dynamic reshaped expectations. Audiences began to approach films anticipating layers, clues, hidden structures. Rewatching became less about enjoyment and more about excavation. Some films benefited from this shift, others collapsed under it. Many misunderstood the lesson, mistaking opacity for depth. Inception was complex because it was disciplined. Its imitators often chased confusion without coherence. Online culture also amplified the film's thematic resonance. The idea of nested realities landed differently in a digital age defined by curated identities, algorithmic feeds, and performative selves. People began reading Inception less as science fiction and more as metaphor about misinformation, belief bubbles, and the danger of narratives that feel true because they're reinforced from within. The dream became the feed, the architect became the algorithm, the projections became us. Memes stripped the film down to its bones and somehow made it sharper. Humor exposed the absurdity of overthinking while also celebrating it. Inception became both deeply serious and deeply mockable, a rare balance. That duality kept it alive. Films that can't be joked about calcify. Films that can only be joked about evaporate. Inception sat in the tension between reverence and ridicule, which is exactly where cultural longevity lives. The internet didn't dilute the film's meaning. It multiplied it. Interpretations didn't converge, they diverged. And Nolan seemed to understand that multiplicity was the point. An idea, once planted, doesn't belong to its creator anymore. It mutates, evolves, becomes something else entirely. That's Inception applied culturally. In this sense, Inception became a self-fulfilling experiment. A movie about ideas spreading uncontrollably became an idea that spread uncontrollably. The discourse wasn't a side effect. It was the final layer of the dream. But influence doesn't stop at conversation. It shows up in craft, in structure, in the kinds of risks studios are willing or unwilling to take. And to understand Inception's true legacy, you have to look at what came after it. Not just who copied it, but who misunderstood it entirely. If Inception changed how audiences talked about movies, it also quietly rewired how Hollywood chased ambition. The years after 2010 are littered with films that feel like echoes, some respectful, some hollow, many confused about what they were actually imitating. The influence wasn't just stylistic, it was structural. Nolan didn't popularize complexity, he demonstrated how to control it. And that distinction is where most successors faltered. Immediately after Inception, studios began greenlighting smart blockbusters at an accelerated rate. High concepts, layered narratives, endings designed to provoke debate. On paper, this looked like progress. In practice, many of these films misunderstood the core lesson. They equated ambiguity with depth, convolution with intelligence. What they missed was discipline. Inception is complicated, yes, but it is also ruthlessly organized. Every rule exists to serve theme. Every twist has consequence. Confusion is never the goal, engagement is. Some films learned the right lessons. You can see Inception's DNA in projects that respect audience intelligence without abandoning emotional stakes. These films treat structure like architecture, load-bearing, intentional, elegant. They don't dump information, they design comprehension. Nolan's influence shows up less in imagery and more in restraint, trusting viewers to connect dots, allowing silence to do narrative work, resisting the urge to explain away mystery. Others chase surface elements instead, folding realities without purpose, nonlinear timelines without emotional logic, endings that refuse resolution simply to feel deep. These films often collapsed under their own weight because they treated ambiguity as an aesthetic rather than a responsibility. Nolan never does that. He understands that withholding answers only works when the questions are meaningful. Without emotional investment, mystery feels empty. Audiences don't lean in, they disengage. Perhaps the most significant shift Inception triggered was the rise of the director as brand. After 2010, studios became more willing to sell films on authorship rather than property. From the director of became a selling point again. Nolan didn't just prove that original stories could succeed, he proved that trust could be monetized. Audiences weren't buying a concept, they were buying confidence. That trust economy reshaped how risk was calculated, yet even that lesson had limits. Nolan is rare because he pairs ambition with coherence. Many filmmakers were given leeway without the same rigor. The result was a wave of films that aspired to puzzle box complexity but lacked internal logic. Viewers grew skeptical. Over time, confusing stopped being a compliment. The post-Inception era revealed an uncomfortable truth. Complexity only works when it's earned. Looking backward, the contrast is striking. Before Inception, blockbusters largely prioritized immediacy, clear goals, clean arcs, definitive endings. After it, audiences became more tolerant of uncertainty, more interested in interpretation. But tolerance isn't unconditional. Inception didn't lower the bar for clarity. It raised it. You could ask more viewers, but you had to give them something equally substantial in return. In the broader history of cinema, Inception sits at a crossroads. It bridges the era of director-driven blockbusters with the algorithm-driven franchise age that followed. It represents a moment when originality at scale still felt possible, not because the market was kinder, but because conviction was stronger. Nolan didn't ask permission to be ambitious. He made ambition legible. That's why Inception's legacy isn't measured by how many films resemble it, but by how many fail trying to. Influence reveals itself most clearly through misunderstanding. And in that sense, Inception stands apart. It didn't create a formula. It exposed how rare true discipline is. The deeper lesson is sobering. Audiences will follow you into complexity if you respect their intelligence and their emotional investment. Neglect either, and the structure collapses. Nolan understood that balance instinctively. His imitators often didn't. Which brings the conversation inward, back to the viewer. Because Inception isn't just a film you watch once, it's a film designed to change shape over time. And the final measure of its success isn't influence or imitation. It's rewatchability. How the film reveals itself differently depending on when, why, and how you return to it. Rewatching Inception is a fundamentally different experience than watching it the first time. The initial viewing is about survival. Keeping up, tracking rules, orienting yourself inside a machine that never stops moving. On rewatch, something shifts. The urgency fades. The structure reveals itself. And what emerges is not a puzzle being solved, but a design being understood. Nolan builds the film to function on delayed comprehension. Many scenes are constructed to feel functional on first pass and revelatory on second. Dialogue that initially reads as exposition quietly doubles as confession. Visual motifs that seem decorative begin to feel diagnostic. You stop asking, "What's happening?" and start asking, "Why is it framed this way?" That's not accidental. Inception is engineered for cognitive payoff over time. Take Cobb's behavior early in the film. On first viewing, his guardedness feels procedural standard thriller stoicism. On rewatch, it reads as avoidance bordering on panic. His reluctance to explain Mao, his insistence on rules, his impatience with questions, all of it telegraphs fear. Not of danger, but of introspection. Once you know where the story ends, Cobb's entire arc reframes itself as a prolonged refusal to grieve. The film doesn't change, your access to it does. Ariadne's role deepens dramatically on repeat viewings. Initially, she functions as audience surrogate. On rewatch, she becomes something closer to therapist, challenging Cobb's narrative. probing inconsistencies, refusing to accept technical explanations for emotional wounds. Her confrontations feel less like plot necessities and more like interventions. Nolan plants these dynamics early, trusting that they'll bloom later for attentive viewers. The film's visual language also rewards familiarity. Background details start to speak. Cobb's projections become easier to spot, not because they're highlighted, but because their aggression feels out of place once you understand their source. Spaces associated with Mal carry a different emotional temperature. Lighting, framing, even blocking subtly shift when her influence enters a scene. None of this announces itself. It waits. The editing becomes newly impressive on rewatch. What once felt breathless now feels controlled. Cross-cutting isn't just about tension, it's about thematic rhyme. Actions mirror across layers. Emotional beats echo physically. Time dilation isn't just a mechanic, it's an experiential metaphor for grief, where moments stretch unbearably long while years disappear unnoticed. That resonance often lands only after you've lived inside the film once already. Even the much-debated ending gains clarity, not an answer, but an intention. On first viewing, attention fixates on the top. On rewatch, attention shifts to Cobb's face, his posture, his breath, his decision to disengage. The film trains you to look for certainty, then quietly asks whether that training was the problem. That reversal doesn't feel clever on repeat, it feels earned. What makes Inception exceptional is that it doesn't punish confusion, it absorbs it. The film understands that meaning isn't delivered whole, it's assembled. Nolan designs scenes like memory itself, fragments that acquire coherence through repetition. That's why the film doesn't decay with familiarity. It clarifies. Many blockbusters burn out once their surprises are known. Inception replaces surprise with recognition. This is cognitive design at work. Nolan isn't just telling a story, he's shaping how information is processed over time. The first viewing creates disorientation. The second creates insight. The third creates appreciation for restraint. Few films manage even one of those experiences cleanly. Inception builds all three into its architecture. And that's why it persists. Not because it's endlessly mysterious, but because it's patiently constructed. It respects the intelligence of the audience not by overwhelming it, but by trusting it to return, to reconsider, to notice what was always there. Which brings us to the present. Because the true measure of Inception's success isn't how it felt in 2010, or even how it feels now, but why it continues to feel relevant in a world increasingly defined by simulations, artificial realities, and blurred lines between belief and truth. That's where this journey ends. Not with answers, but with relevance. If Inception still feels alive today, it's because the world slowly caught up to its anxiety. What once played as speculative unease now feels like ambient reality. We live inside layers, digital, psychological, algorithmic, stacked so tightly that distinguishing belief from construction has become a daily negotiation. Nolan didn't predict this future. He diagnosed a condition that was already forming. The film's central fear isn't that reality might be fake. It's that meaning might be outsourced. In Inception, characters rely on systems, totems, rules, hierarchies to tell them what to trust. Today, we do the same. Metrics replace judgment. Feeds replace reflection. Consensus replaces understanding. The danger isn't deception from outside forces. It's internal surrender, the slow erosion of self-authored meaning. Cobb's journey lands differently now. His obsession with certainty mirrors modern dependence on verification. We refresh, we check, we confirm. And still, the anxiety remains. No one suggests something radical. Certainty doesn't cure doubt. Engagement does. Cobb doesn't regain peace by proving reality. He regains it by choosing presence over proof. That choice feels almost heretical in an age addicted to receipts and screenshots. The film's ethical unease has also aged sharply. Inception. The act of planting ideas without awareness no longer feels hypothetical. Persuasion today is frictionless, invisible, personalized. The film's most chilling implication isn't the technology. It's the ease with which people accept narratives that feel internally coherent. Fisher's transformation works because it aligns with emotional need, not factual accuracy. That mechanism is everywhere now. Belief follows desire more reliably than truth. What Inception offers, quietly but firmly, is a warning about unexamined narratives. The dreams are convincing because no one questions why they exist. Projections turn violent not because they're evil, but because they're defending identity. No one understands that the most aggressive resistance comes not from lies, but from beliefs that feel foundational. challenge them, and the system fights back. This is why the film resists moral closure. The team succeeds, but at a cost that's never fully absolved. Cop returns home, but at the expense of certainty. Nolan refuses to tidy these outcomes because tidy answers would betray the thesis. Growth isn't clean, healing isn't symmetrical, and meaning, once fractured, doesn't reassemble into its original shape. In a landscape dominated by franchises designed to reassure rather than provoke, Inception feels almost defiant. It doesn't promise safety, it promises engagement. It assumes the audience is capable of discomfort and worth challenging. That assumption alone gives it longevity. Films age poorly when they underestimate their viewers. Inception endures because it never does. So why does it still matter now? Because it reminds us that ideas are environments. We live inside them, build defenses around them, protect them violently if threatened. And unless we examine who designed those ideas and why, we risk mistaking familiarity for truth. Nolan doesn't tell us how to escape the dream. He tells us how to notice we're inside one. The final legacy of Inception isn't a spinning top. It's a habit of questioning, not cynically, not endlessly, but honestly. The film doesn't argue that reality is unknowable. It argues that meaning is participatory, that at some point, living requires commitment, not certainty, attention, not verification, and that's why Inception hasn't faded. It doesn't belong to 2010. It belongs to any moment when the world feels over-engineered, over-explained, and underfelt. It speaks to anyone who's ever sensed that clarity can be as dangerous as confusion if it goes unexamined. The dream ends when awareness begins, and whether the top falls or not was never the real question.